the other day I was talking about misfires on this 2005 Chevy truck with the 6-liter. And I know that engine codes and scan tools can only get you so far. It's how you read them is what makes the difference. So number one, I've got random misfires. People go, oh, we need plugs and wires, okay? So right now, what I'm doing is just verifying that my plugs are in good condition. I'm looking for clean ceramics. I'm looking for solid ceramics. Now I see that this one has a little bit of a dark spot, but for the most part, they all look really good. Random misfire, okay? So that's just an instinctual, let's do ignition stuff, okay? I got one more plug to pull, and so far I don't think I've got any ignition misfires going on. Now, I put automatic transmission fluid in my fuel tank, and what it's doing is cleaning my fuel system. From the butt dyno, feeling how this is performing, at idle and low RPMs going down the road, it's kind of sluggish, and it has a definite miss. But at wide open throttle or maybe mid-range throttle, it's running really good. Now, sometimes a broken spark plug can make that, but what my thoughts are is the rest of the codes. I've got lean, bank 1 and 2, O2 sensors. I've got fuel injection circuit malfunction. Those are telling me I have a fuel rail problem. So what I'm going to do next, after I pull this next plug and just inspect it, is take this fuel injection rail apart and clean and inspect the fuel injectors. Just a couple little shields and covers and a few wire connections, and my fuel rail is nearly available to be pulled. I've got one more fuel injector to unclip over there. I've got the 4 bolts holding the fuel rail down, and then I've got that fuel line that needs this tool to be popped apart. Before I remove the fuel rail, I'm going to grab an air nozzle and blow out all of the loose contaminants around the intake. Now everything is loose and everything is out of the way. There's just 2 bolts that hold the fuel rail in place, and now it's just O-rings holding the injectors and the fuel rail. So I'm going to just kind of pry a little, see if I can pop it just like that. Pop it. And that one is loose. Come to the other side. Wiggle. pop that. And remove this whole fuel rail. So I definitely see some filth and crud on the passenger side, and I don't see as much on the driver's side. Maybe a little there. But I wanted to keep this rail in the upright position. So before I flip it over, what I intend to do is pop the little metal retaining clips off of these injectors, and then I'm going to remove each injector and inspect the back side of them. So the injectors are out, and just initially looking, there's a whole lot more filth on the intake side, indicating maybe a little bit of blow-by or vent issues. I didn't really see a whole lot of filth on the inside, but what I'm going to do is give them a nice little bath, and then I'm also going to check resistance values and maybe even see if I can cycle these things with a little bit of pressure behind them. So now I've got my meter here, and I've got it set on 200 ohms resistance, and that's just a scale. And so I'm going to go in here and I'm going to just check my values. So I've got 12.7 ohms. 12.5, 12.5, 12.4, 12.6. Now what I'm looking for is generally there's a range between like 10 and 15 ohms. And I just want to verify that all of these are pretty much the same. 12.7. If you get one that's way off, you know that there's an issue. 12.8. 12.8. I'm making sure that I'm only holding my test probes to these pins. I'm not pushing on them. 12.9. So I've got a pretty close range, and that's good. They're all good and clean. The next thing I'll do is get some test wires and just make sure they're clicking when I give them some power. Okay, now I've got 2 wires tied up to my battery here, and I have them just cut flush. I don't want them to be exposed so they can touch each other if I'm messing around inside here. So what I'm doing now is just looking for an audible click when I touch the connectors, the tabs together. So I'm going to do that 8 more times and verify that I've got all good injectors. I realize I said 8 more times. That would imply I have a 9-cylinder LS. So I only did it 7. So by verifying I have the correct resistance values for these injectors and verifying that they click and do their thing, some even squirted a little bit of fluid out, I know that my injectors are in good shape. That rusty tube right there coming out of the valve cover goes right up to the intake, and that's kind of an evacuation system that they've got. Well, these valve covers are kind of known for allowing too much oil to go past. And I believe that's where some of this crud on the front cylinders is coming from. So I've ordered a new set of updated valve covers, and I also ordered an intake. It was like $108. And the reason I didn't just clean this out is because there's so many passages. I have before, but I bet I've gone through $30 worth of brake clean, and it's just not worth it today. So I'm gonna grab a deep well 8mm socket and remove the nuts on the studs holding the coil packs in place, and then pop these valve covers off. By then, I'll have new ones waiting at the parts store. Keeping cleanliness as a priority, I dropped a couple 1/2-inch bolts down into the injector ports, gave another quick job with the air gun, and now I'm going to shoot some degreaser because I'm going to be popping that intake off, and I want to make sure that everything that comes apart does not go into the engine. So I'm going to let that soak for a minute, and then I'm going to blow it off again, and hopefully that captures all the crud. This throttle body is liquid cooled. There is coolant that runs through the throttle body, so I disconnected the little crossover tube and was able to get enough slack in the hoses to get the throttle body off the intake. All of these bolts are loose, and I believe my 1/2-inch bolts are hanging me up now, but I can get those out of the way. And the intake just lifts out of the way. Look how fancy that is in there. Critters are amazing creatures. I love them. So before I go any further with any compressed air, now it's shop vac time. I got to get as much of this crud out of there as possible. Now I'm going to spend a little more time cleaning up, but it doesn't really take a whole lot to make this thing shine. Another code that I had was knock sensors 1 and 2. So the resistance value on these knock sensors is 93,000 to 110,000 ohms. So I've got my value at 200,000 ohms. And once again, just touching from that to ground. So I have 99,600 ohms. That's good. It's a knock sensor that was doing its job. Ooh, 84,000 ohms. So most likely, these do have a ability for water to get down into the knock sensor housing through this quite loose seal here. So I'm going to clean these out real well, and then I'm going to test individual resistance to see if I need to replace any of these knock sensors while I'm in there. If you can see that, that is sitting in water. I'm sure that would alter the values. So here's our front knock sensor. Here's our rear knock sensor. You can see how long it's been underwater. And I believe that the harness has probably seen better days. So I'm going to see if I can get a harness. I'm going to see if I can get a rear knock sensor Depending on the price, I might just replace this one too. I did damage the connection when I took it apart accidentally, so we'll see about that. A little bit of brake clean, a little bit of degreaser, a little bit of help from a wire brush, and that whole valley is good and clean. I'm gonna pop those valve covers off and it's time to go get some parts. Well, I'm back from the parts store. Little mix up. I got an intake gasket set, not an intake manifold. So I'll show you what I've done to clean up my old one. I fired up my old pressure washer. And I would say that this bad boy cleaned up pretty all right. I washed inside, outside. Apparently missed the bottom side. But I got this as clean as possible. And thanks to my new gasket set, I'll be able to just reinstall this. I'm gonna go ahead and send that air nozzle down every single orifice. Make sure it is good and clean. I think that's gonna do the job just fine. My valve cover mating surface is clean. I am very impressed with the very low amount of sludge in the rocker area of the head. So that's cool. I've got my new valve covers, so I'm gonna get them covered up quick. Both sets of coil packs on, and now it's time for the knock sensors. Now this was the dry one, but it's probably hard to see on camera, but it is still wet down there. So I'm gonna get a rag down in there, soak it all up, wipe it down, and get the new knock sensor in. I've got the new knock sensors in, and now it's time to do the harness. I'm going to use just some clear RTV, and I will plug that in. And then I'm going to throw the RTV around this plug. Now I did not dry fit the plug, but my guess is that it fits better than stock. But a little silicone never hurt nobody. Now I'm gonna hold the wire up and push the plug down. Now I'll just wipe the edges to make sure that it seals. All right. Same thing here. Plug it in. Give some silicone. Without measuring, I'd say this is about a 3/16, maybe 1/8 inch to a 3/16 inch bead. I'm sure it's plenty. That one I can see all the way around, but I'll just wipe it anyway. Okay. And now, since I'm this far, now I'm going to throw some silicone on the wire. I'm sure this is excessive, but I don't want it to leak. All right, so knock sensors were replaced because that one had a low resistance value, and it was a low resistance value because it was full of water and all kinds of this garbage. I don't know if you can see how nasty the harness is now, but I'm going to have to detail this a little bit. The valve covers were replaced because the baffles have been updated, and now the oil that splashes against the valve covers will no longer just be sucked up into the intake through the two vents. The injectors were cleaned and tested to verify that they are firing. Everything was cleaned very well. I pressure washed my intake. I blew it out with compressed air. And now it's time to install the intake, install the injectors, and also install the throttle body. Ribeye of the sky. All right, I've got all my rags out. I've got my new gaskets on the intake. Everything looks like it's out of the way enough to slide this in. So here we go. So I have just a little bit of red grease, and I'm just gonna basically get these injector seals covered but not caked. I'm gonna pop them in just like that. All the injectors are in place. All the little clips are installed on the inside, and all the plugs are on the outside. I'm gonna give a little bit more grease to those O-rings on the injector side, on the cup side, and get this onto the intake. Our injector rail is in. Now it's just as simple as plugging in all of the things I unplugged. And then, before I hook up that fuel line, I'm going to put an old pop bottle or some type of a canister over that fuel line, cycle the key, and just in case any debris from blowing out the engine bay got in there, it'll flush it out. I'll hook up that fuel line. We'll see if it fires up. All right, that was a little red tinted gasoline just to prove to you that I did dump transmission fluid in my tank. Let's see if this thing fires up now. All right, time will tell if my little mist is gonna go away, if my check engine light's gonna go away. I'm gonna run it for a couple minutes, make sure I don't have any major leaks, go from there.